Somewhere in Kenya, three elephants are walking across the savannah, and every step is agony. Poisoned arrows are buried in their sides, the parting gift of poachers who looked at the largest land animal on Earth and somehow saw a paycheck. These are bull elephants, bleeding and exhausted, and the kind of pain that should send any wild creature as far from human beings as its legs can carry it. Because humans did this. Humans have been doing it to their kind for a very, very long time. So they walk. And here's the part that should stop you cold. They do not walk away from people. They walk toward them. Specifically, they walk toward the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, a rescue center run by the exact species currently sticking arrows into their sides. Not by accident, not lost. The people who work there believe at least one of these elephants already knew the place, had been helped there before, and had filed that particular patch of ground under a single unlikely heading: safe. This happened in late summer 2015. It was documented and written up by the rescue team themselves, and all three pulled through. And it is, once you sit with it, one of the strangest facts in the animal kingdom, because it is not supposed to happen. Let me be precise about who we are in this story. We are the most dangerous predator this planet has ever produced. Statistically, measurably, no contest. We are the thing that every wild animal spent the length of its evolutionary history learning to fear and learning correctly. And yet, again and again, across species that haven't shared a common ancestor in tens of millions of years, an animal in serious trouble will sometimes turn and walk straight toward the one creature it has the most reason on Earth to run from. Not its own kind, which would at least make sense, but the animal most responsible for hunting and poisoning it for several thousand years. Why would an animal ask its own predator for help? The honest answer runs through one beautiful piece of published science, a still simmering argument about what's happening inside an animal's head, and a handful of cases so strange they sound like folklore. Let's start with the one thing here we can actually prove. In the Miombo woodlands of northern Mozambique lives a small brown bird called the greater honeyguide, and it has a problem it cannot solve alone. It is obsessed with beeswax. It can locate a wild bee's nest better than almost anything alive. What it cannot do is get into one. A hive is a fortress defended by thousands of stinging insects, and a bird the size of your fist has no way through. We have fire and smoke and tools and a few 100,000 years of practice robbing bees. But we have the opposite problem. We're hopeless at finding the hives tucked deep in tree trunks across miles of bush. Two species, two halves of one problem. And somewhere in the deep past, they made a deal. The honey guide finds the nest, then flies to a human, calling, loud, insistent, impossible to ignore, and leads that person through the bush, tree by tree, to the hidden hive. The human opens it with fire and tools, takes the honey, and leaves the wax behind. Payment rendered. The wax being the one thing the bird could never reach on its own. For a long time, this was treated as a charming campfire story, the kind a documentary narrator says in a warm voice while nobody actually checks. Then, in 2016, a biologist named Claire Spottiswoode checked. Working with Keith and Colleen Begg and the Yao honey hunters of the Nyassa Reserve, she zeroed in on one detail. The hunters summoned the birds with a specific sound, a trill followed by a grunt, brr-hum, passed down from father to son for generations. The claim was that the bird actually understood it. So they tested it and published the result in the journal Science. They played the real brr-hum call, then compared it against control sounds, other human words, other animal noises, matched for loudness, and the birds were not fooled. The genuine cooperation call roughly doubled the chance a honey guide would agree to lead a hunter at all, from about 33% up to 66%. And it lifted the odds of the whole partnership actually ending at a bee's nest from 16% all the way to 54%, more than tripled. Read that one more time. A completely wild animal, never tamed, never trained, no handler heard one specific human sound, understood it to mean let's work together right now, and acted on it. The researchers called it what it is, one of the only known cases on the planet of genuine, two-way communication between people and a free-living wild animal. Not tolerance, not a trick, a conversation. But here's the part the feel-good version always leaves out. The honey guide is not sweet. This same bird, the one that cooperates with us so elegantly, is also one of nature's most brutal brood parasites. It lays its eggs in other birds' nests, and its chick hatches early, armed with sharp hooks on its beak, and uses them to murder its foster siblings one by one before they can compete. So, the creature we call nature's great collaborator spends the opening chapter of its life as a tiny assassin, which tells you something we'll need in a minute. Cooperation is not the same thing as kindness, it's just math that happens to pay off. If you want the uncomfortable version of the nature documentary where the beautiful thing is also a little horrifying, that's the whole job. Because the honey guide raises the question hanging over everything else here. When an animal comes to us for help, what is actually going on inside its skull? Does it understand in any real sense that we're a separate creature with the power to fix its problem? Or is something much simpler happening that only looks like understanding? Researchers lay this out as a ladder, and the rungs matter. The bottom rung is pure learned association. An animal once had a good experience involving a human, and its brain filed it away. Humans plus this situation equals relief. No deep thought, no model of your mind, just a link. The way a dog learns the sound of a can opener means dinner. It doesn't need to understand you. It only needs to have been right before. The top rung is far steeper, something like a theory of mind, a real, if partial, grasp that you are a separate being with your own goals and abilities. That's a very high bar, and biologists argue constantly about how many species clear it. Our best evidence for the higher rungs comes, fittingly, from the animal that's spent the longest living inside our houses. In 2025, researchers strapped tiny mobile eye trackers onto dogs and recorded exactly where they looked during real interactions. They compared a bare pointing finger, a point plus eye contact, a gaze alone, a fake throwing motion, and no cue at all. The runaway winner was pointing plus eye contact, the deliberate I am telling you something combination. That's when dogs locked onto the right object and went to it far more often than chance. It's the same skill a human infant shows when it first grasps that a pointing finger means look over there, not at the finger. And here's the quiet gut punch. Dogs do this. Decades of comparative work suggest chimpanzees, our closest relatives, far smarter than dogs by almost any raw measure, largely don't. Something about 30,000 years alongside us wired a social instinct into dogs that intelligence alone doesn't buy. Now run that skill in reverse. If a wild animal has even a crude version of it, walking up to a human stops being a fluke. If it can grasp dimly that a human is a thing that notices problems and acts on them, then walking up to one instead of hiding in a thicket to die quietly becomes a strategy. But keep that ladder in view, because almost none of the animals we're about to meet have clearly climbed past the bottom rung. Which brings us to the documented cases where this gets genuinely strange. Off the coast of Kona, Hawaii, on a night dive in January 2013, a scuba instructor named Keller LaRose was watching manta rays feed when he heard a loud squeak behind him. He turned and a bottlenose dolphin was 3 feet away, alone and moving wrong. It had a fishing hook buried in its left pectoral fin, with line wound tight around the fin. LaRose signaled the animal closer. It came. It rolled over and held itself motionless, inches from his hands, while he worked the hook free and cut the line with a pair of small scissors. Then it was gone. Sit with the arithmetic. A wild animal held still, in the dark, against every instinct it owns, so a member of its single most dangerous predator species could cut it free. No anesthetic, no guarantee whatsoever. Or take the deer, and I love this one because a deer is not a genius. In October 2010, a charter captain named Tom Satre was crossing Stevens Passage in Alaska when 4 young Sitka black-tailed deer, more than a mile from shore, exhausted in freezing water and minutes from drowning, swam straight for his 62-foot boat. Not away from it, toward it. They circled the hull, looked up at the people on deck, and let themselves be hauled aboard, collapsing, shivering, before being carried to harbor and released into the trees. A deer. The animal whose entire personality is run first, ask questions never. And when the only other option was drowning, that ancient, hardwired rule simply switched off. There are more. A raven that screamed on a fence until someone pulled the porcupine quills from its face. A fox in Russia that stood still with its head stuck in a jar until a stranger lifted it off. And rehabbers say it isn't only the clever species. Coyotes, wolves, bears, and cougars turn up too, or so the people who see it report. It's testimony, not a controlled trial, but the same story keeps surfacing. Animals that would never normally let you close will, in genuine extremity, walk up and, for lack of a better word, ask. So we're back at the question and we can answer it, but only if we give up the tidy single answer, because there isn't one. There are three. They're not the same thing. And the honest move is to keep them apart instead of blending them into one warm story. The first is coevolution, real, species wide, written into the genes over evolutionary time. That's the honey guide, and almost nothing else on this list. An entire wild species built a communication channel with us because, generation after generation, it paid off. No individual bird reasons it out. The behavior survived because it worked. That's the rarest and strongest category, and why it earned a place in a peer reviewed journal, not a comment section. The second is individual learning. This is the elephants we opened with. And notice this is emphatically not elephants trust humans, which they should not and mostly do not. It's a specific animal that had a specific good experience in a specific place and remembered it. In latter terms, that's the bottom rung and only the bottom rung. A learned association. Nobody has to invent a theory of mind to explain it. Elephants carry decades of memory and past knowledge through the herd, so the association can spread a little through a family group. But it's a narrow exception carved out of an otherwise justified fear. One door marked safe in a very long wall, not the wall coming down. And the third is the barest, bleakest one of all, desperation. The deer had no relationship with that boat. It had simply run out of options. When you're drowning, a large, unfamiliar object that isn't actively killing you stops being a threat and starts being a raft. That requires no theory of mind at all, just a fear response overridden by something more urgent, maybe a blind pull toward anything that isn't the freezing water closing over your head. From the deck, it can look exactly like a plea for help. It might just be a body doing the last desperate math it has left, and that math is nothing like the honey guides. I've used the word twice on purpose. The birds is genetic, written into a whole species over countless generations. The deer's is one nervous system improvising in the final 30 seconds of its life. Same word, opposite thing. Don't let the echo flatten them back together. Notice what we are not claiming, that wild animals secretly like us or forgive us or think of us as friends. Their fear of our species is accurate and hard-earned. What these cases show is narrower, and I'd argue stranger, that the fear is a setting, not a law, a default calibrated over millennia for ordinary life. And ordinary life, it turns out, has an override switch. And the switch is labeled nothing left to lose. We should be honest about the ceiling, too. We cannot interview a dolphin. We can't ask the raven what it was calculating on that fence. The scientists who study this are rightly cautious. Humans are pathologically good at projecting rich inner lives onto behavior that might, in cold reality, be far simpler. Most of these stories are anecdotes, not experiments. And an anecdote is a single point of light, not a map. But then there's the honey guide. And the honey guide is not an anecdote. It's a controlled, repeatable, published fact. At least one wild species genuinely understands a human signal and answers it on purpose. And once you know the wall between us and them can have a door in it, that the gap isn't always uncrossable, every one of those other strange stories gets a little less far-fetched. Maybe it's coevolution, maybe it's memory, maybe it's pure desperation. Most likely, across all these different species, it's all three in different measures on different nights. Which brings us back to three elephants in Kenya walking the wrong way. Toward the arrows, toward the species that fired them, toward a low building full of the very animals that had spent several thousand years teaching them, correctly, to run. They walked toward us anyway, because somewhere in that enormous, scarred, grieving memory sat one stubborn fact that outweighed all the others, that sometimes, against every lesson evolution ever taught them, the most dangerous thing on the entire planet turns out to be the only thing that can pull the arrow out.